I pray for both of you. But Lord, we thank you so much for Kirsty and Andrew and for just what they mean to this family, to this church. Thank you for just the way that they have sown and given and loved and shared for so many years. We just thank you for this opportunity to listen and to hear from both of them today. And we thank you for the way that you have placed things in their hearts. Just give us ears and hearts that are receptive to what you want to say to us. In Jesus' name, amen. So that we can hear me. I was amused at being given the slowing down practices, because I think if you know me well, I usually need to speed it up rather than slow down. I'm not one of these people that rush around and can tend towards inertia and sitting down. But this isn't about necessarily physical slowing down. It's more about slowing down our internal noise, and I'm someone who needs to do that as well as anyone. So Andrew and I are going to talk about the contemplative or meditative practices. And I'm going to look at why we might want to practice these and how I feel the Bible encourages us to. And Andrew's going to look at what they are, and a little bit, there's lots of them, and how you might practice these. So these are more meditative and perhaps more individual practices, though you can do these in groups, and I do, which I find helpful. But perhaps more individual. So firstly, I think it needs to be said, we are naming these as slowing down practices, but the goal of contemplative prayer is not about slowing down. Slowing down is part and parcel of these practices, a precursor perhaps and a consequence, but the goal of contemplative prayer is to be closer to God and to be more present to God. The invitation of these practices is to learn to be present to God, ourselves, and others. So I wanted to say a bit about my personal experience of contemplative practices. So about 15 or 20 years ago, I joined a group of mums called ourselves, I think it was called Motherhood, God and Theology. And they were women from a different Christian tradition than my own. And they practiced their faith rather differently. And so instead of everybody praying out loud, somebody might read a prayer or a poem, and we would all listen. And I found that a bit strange at first, and maybe it was a bit critical. But I began to find this kind of practice was very calming and very opening for me. And particularly, we would go on retreat. And as somebody with young children, a day off was fantastic. But we go to these lovely retreat places, centres like the Build, and I was introduced to having 2-3 hours spent on your own with sort of material and guided material, and I just found this tremendously helpful in my walk with God. Particularly for me, the practices of that use your imagination, imaginative contemplation, which is imagining yourself in the Bible story and what you hear, what you're seeing, what you're noticing, what is your personal interaction with that story and with God. Or imaginative prayer, where you imagine yourself with Jesus and he might sit down and ask you a particular question or ask you to tell him something. And one very powerful one for me was, I always remember, was we were invited to imagine Jesus comes to our home and he knocks on the door, you open the door and you show him around your house. And again, as a person with a young family and a slightly messy and chaotic home, of which I felt ashamed of a lot of the time, I remember Jesus walking around my home, and what I saw was him just sitting down on the messiest floor and playing with the kids and not caring at all about the chaos. And that was very impacting for me, and a different concept of myself and Jesus as a result. So I'm going to look at why these practices are helpful. They pull us into the present moment, inviting us from our preoccupation with tomorrow and yesterday. And I think we need this because we are very preoccupied with tomorrow, or we can be. We can spend our time rushing from here, rushing there, and with very little time noticing what's happening right now. And really right now, and this is the second slide, in this moment is where we will encounter God. And that's what the important thing is about learning to be present in this moment. Our minds are full of thoughts, and that's absolutely fine. It's supposed to be. That's what our brain is designed to do. The problem is that we do need to learn to detach a bit from our thoughts. And the problem is when our thoughts run us, and not the other way around. And one way of looking at it, our thoughts are about the future. We're imagining, planning, thinking, getting excited by it, but often also quite anxiety-driven, catastrophizing thoughts about the future. And our brain is often there. Also, our brain can be in the past. We can be ruminating, going over, what did I say, who said that, why did I say that, what did I look like, what happened, hurt feelings. And although we are supposed to contemplate and, come to terms with what has happened, we can be overly occupied with that, and it can take up our space again. We cannot stop it, is the problem. And a lot of depression is a big symptom of depression is constant rumination. With our anxious-driven future thinking and our ruminating over the past, we can spend very little time in the here and now. And I don't know if you've ever eaten a meal or gone for a walk or done some activity and realised you hadn't really been paying any attention to it. You almost didn't notice it. I can have eaten my breakfast and not actually not noticed I do it. So I eat another one, which doesn't help very much. Mindful eating is supposed to be extremely good for weight loss. But how much time do we truly spend grounded in what we're actually doing and not kind of rather spoil it by our mind being all over the place, and particularly in tomorrow or in the past? And the problem is that it is hard to be present to God if we are rushing forward and backwards in our thinking. And this issue of our thinking is so prevalent and so impacting on mental health that practices of mindfulness, which is like a secular practice of these spiritual practices, is a huge part of the treatment of anxiety and depression just now. And I would love to say more about that. It's such an interesting story if you want to look it up. And we will have some links to give you to see if you want to research and look up different practices. So we're going to slide 3. So just a few thoughts about why we hurry towards tomorrow. Thomas Merton says, we feel that where we are is not enough. Thomas Merton was a modern Christian mystic. And Brené Brown, who's a TED Talk speaker and writer, she's written a book called The Gift of Imperfection, talks about we often have this feeling of not enough. We don't feel we are enough, we don't feel we have enough, and we hurry and rush to fill that space of not enough. And sometimes, so we can feel harried or chased or threatened. We're often in flight or fright or freeze. And freeze is a part of panic that we don't often think about, which is one that I'm probably going to mostly. And this doesn't result in rushing or planning, but in desperate distracting. So binge watching Netflix, which can be great fun, but also if it's just there to distract us, it's not living in the present moment, and it's not somewhere we'll be present to God. So I'm going to look at some scriptures where I hope you'll see how they open up to this idea of the call to be in the present moment. Then Jesus said to the disciples, this is Luke 12. Then Jesus said to the disciples, and so I tell you not to worry about the food you need to stay alive or about the clothes you need for your body. Life is much more important than food, and the body more important than clothes. Look at the crows or ravens. They don't sow seeds or gather a harvest. They don't have storerooms or barns. God feeds them. You are worth so much more than birds. Can any of you live a little bit longer by worrying about it? If you can't manage even such a small thing, why worry about other things? Look at how the wild flowers grow. They don't work or make clothes for themselves, but I tell you, not even King Solomon with all his wealth had clothes as beautiful as one of these flowers. It is God who clothes the grass that's here today and gone tomorrow, burnt up in the oven. Won't he be all the more sure to clothe you? So I think what I see here is Jesus inviting us from the preoccupation of tomorrow and pulling us into the present moment. Consider the lilies, consider the wildflowers and how they grow. Consider the ravens, the wild birds. Look what is in front of you. Look at these amazing things and listen to the story and what they're teaching us. They've got something to show us, this thing here and now. In Matthew, at the end of Matthew, this passage says, "Let tomorrow worry about itself. Each day has its own troubles." And I used to find that a bit triggering because, there is something to worry about. And it's true, this day will have its troubles, but we won't be sorting out today's if our head is in tomorrow. I think that Jesus is inviting us to the moment. Sometimes this present moment isn't easy, but he's still inviting us there to deal with that. And as I said, it's not always easy to come present to the moment, but that's where our invitation is. And it is where we'll find God. And just my final thing is the contemplative tradition has taught me that God is always here, that we don't need to strive to get into his inner sanctum. I think some of the messages, and that's not, I think, what we teach here as a church, but in the past, there was this idea you had to go through Thanksgiving and then worship, and then somehow, eventually, if you worked hard, you would get into this inner sanctum. I think what I've learned is that God is here, he's present. We just need to slow down our inner noise and to bring ourselves to a place where we can be aware of him. So Andrew's going to come and share the next part.
Morning. I don't remember whether this was a dream or whether it was part of a prayer time. I was in the scene of From Hound of the Baskervilles. In it, Henry or Charles Baskerville is returning from a meal. It's late at night. He's having to cross the moor. And suddenly he hears the sound of a braying hound. His ears prick up. He subconsciously picks up the pace. His mind races towards the story of an ancestor being mauled by a hound at that very spot. Now there's a rustle. He starts to run. His pulse is increasing. The sweat begins to appear. Now he hears padding feet and rasping breath. He's now running for his life. He's assailed by thoughts of his impending horrible death. The hound's breath is at his neck now as he awaits the final bound and closes his eyes. Nothing. I open my eyes and I see a white terrier scampering past me and into the distance. There's a huge amount of relief and some chortling. all that energy, all those frantic thoughts. You might, I wonder, recognize yourself as well. We're looking at slowing down, specifically slowing down our minds, and there's an intuition that meditative and contemplative practices may help here. And these are practices such as labyrinths, journaling, meditative walking, body prayer, breath prayer, lectio divina, examine, welcoming prayer, spiritual direction, retreats and silence. We've only got 10 minutes. I'm not going to describe all of those. There are 3 websites I might want to direct you to. One is a local, a Scottish one called Epiphany Group. There's another one by the Irish Jesuits called Pray As You Go. And there's an American one called Contemplative Outreach. These talks will be uploaded on Monday, and with it will be a sheet. And on that sheet will be a list of all these practices with links to a number of pages and also some recommended books if you want to take this further. Now, if we were to think about what these practices have in common and how they might relate to slowing down the mind, we could maybe step back a little bit and look at a couple of definitions of contemplation. So, first one, contemplation is a way of listening with the heart while not relying entirely on the head. So here we've got a shift of attention and balance from head to heart through listening. Secondly, contemplation is a prayerful letting go of our sense of control. So here an issue is named, control and a direction of travel is given, letting go. Thirdly, contemplative practices give us the eyes to see and ears to hear God calling us to the banquet of our lives as they are. So here we've been pointed back to our lives as they are, here and now. Next, if we can use a quote from the Christian philosopher Blaise Pascal as a springboard into the mind and our inner world. All of humanity's problems stem from our inability to sit quietly in a room alone. So this echoes for me of James 4. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires, the battle within you? So it seems that left alone with our own mind, we're largely uncomfortable. We have a waterfall of internal scripts that impel us to get up, to go, and to do. And these are like a gravitational force that pulls us away from the present moment into the future or the past, as Kirsty has mentioned. This is due in part to our need for an immoderate level of control. That is to predict, to prepare, to anticipate and acquire, and to protect ourselves. In short, we worry and we catastrophize. So there's an increase in our internal pace. There's a sense of unrest. We search to fill the gaps in the day or try to create space in our day. And yet, another writer has said, we don't need to run anymore. Contemplation is about noticing. It's about stopping and it's about turning towards the present moment and what it brings, the messy and the delightful. Confident that this is where God is to be found in the midst of our life. So now my internal Sherlock Holmes video is changing to noticing the sound, stopping and turning towards it rather than running away. It's not coming to a cinema near you soon. Whilst most of these practices I've experienced, and I think that we can expect to be led, it's an accompanied journey. I think it's silence that's most helped me in that essential journey from our head with its churning thoughts down into the heart and then into the body. Some time ago, I became aware that I was tired of generating words in prayer. I felt the focus was on me and not on God, and that the weight was on the wrong foot. I was asking if such intensity was necessary. I had become the center, as if I was a sun, needing to generate warmth and to manage order. Silence encourages me to stop generating words and detach from them when they start cascading. Silence encourages me to not be carried away with their forceful flow. Silence encourages me to explore simply being in my life, in my body, for a while, at points, to take a leaf, if you like, out of the wildflower. Silence is simple and also difficult. You sit in a comfortable yet alert position and just notice your breathing. Maybe inhale and exhale deeply at the start and maybe at the end. But in the main, just notice it, follow it, and that's all. You may like to imagine yourself descending with your out-breath deeper into your being, where the Spirit of God also dwells. Now, the common issue, obviously, is distraction, particularly with thoughts. And a helpful image that has come to me is that of a waterfall of cascading thoughts. But with me standing to the side of the waterfall on a ledge, just watching the thoughts go by. Just noticing them without judgment or needing to fix them, create some distance. I am not my thoughts. And by the way, it needn't be sitting, and it needn't be for very long. I do this when I'm walking, or if I'm just aware that suddenly my internal pace is picked up. Thoughts will come, and it's not bad. It's just what the mind does. The guidance is to notice when you get distracted and return to the breath. Alternatively, you could think of gentle repetition of a word like Jesus or Yahweh. The monastic tradition has a line which I refer to, I go back to quite often, and it's this. It's very helpful, I find. It's, we rise and we fall. We rise and we fall. And this helps me not go off on one about failure or capacity or about competency or competition. Silence is not a time for acquisition, for earnestly seeking insight or revelation, though that may come. It's more about cessation. It's stop and sink. The Spirit of God is given to instill that inner sense of being in union with God, to join our love with His, to reaffirm the essential oneness of God with His creation. Silence also allows those things that we suppress to come to the surface. If you do notice something of import, then turn towards it. Receive it with your breath. Allow it to mix with the Spirit of God who is in you. Again, no words. Just trust the mix and stay a while. So, in short, contemplative practices can help in slowing us down by suggesting we take seriously one word: stop. And on the back of that, be present. And so create some distance from your racing thoughts and stay a while. Look at what it is. We're going to do that just now, actually. We're going to look at how the wildflowers grow. Or if you're on Zoom, just be silent for 2 minutes. You won't be able to see this video, I'm afraid. So while it's playing, what do you notice in yourself? And please hold those impressions.